Welcome to my channel. I want to thank you for coming to my channel to watch my videos. I want to thank each one of you that has subscribed to my channel. Everyone that likes my videos, that comments on my videos, and that shares my videos. I really do appreciate the traffic. I want to ask you a question. Are you familiar with the media term without evidence? They like to use it a lot. They claim that people are making claims without evidence, and it's always people on the right that are making claims that the media says are without evidence. Well, how can you make claims with evidence when the evidence is being withheld? And what's happening now is the evidence is coming out, and it doesn't look good for the January 6th claims of insurrection. It turns out that they've been lying a lot.
Officer Harry Dunn acted with remarkable courage and valor to defend both our institutions and our people.
The Capitol Police officer assigned to the protective detail of then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi appears to have given false testimony.
This is perjury. Brought in to corroborate the testimony of another Capitol Police officer.
It is imperative that we establish the truth of that day.
It's a Capitol.
Yeah, wouldn't it be nice if we actually did establish the truth of that day? Because we now know that we have two Capitol Police officers who perjured themselves in federal court to help obtain convictions of people that were at the January 6th event. I'm not going to call it an insurrection because it wasn't an insurrection. It was a lot of turmoil. It was a lot of anger. There's no question about that. There were some people who crossed the line and broke the law, that's certain. But we also have evidence that has come out that some of this was stoked by FBI undercover agents. And now we find out that Capitol Police, who were on the scene during this so-called insurrection, have lied under oath about what took place. And this is one of them.
Police officer who just took the stand in the Oath Keepers trial.
Sentenced to 18 years in prison.
Generations to come will think of him.
It never happened.
The way he unpacks the stories,
I don't conflate my story.
sounds like something a useful idiot would say.
Officer Harry Dunn, in his new book, Standing My Ground, a Capitol Police Officer's Fight for Accountability and Good Trouble.
Officer Dunn has been among the first Capitol Police officers to describe what happened to law enforcement on January 6th.
It is expected that when somebody does release a book that they're going to do a quote-unquote book tour, that they're going to make media appearances. The most unique and interesting thing about this book tour that he's on is that for some reason, none other of the Capitol Police officers are allowed to tell their stories.
What if Donald Trump wins again? Would you?
You got anything strong?
Let's make no mistake about it. There were a lot of officers injured that day. I have reviewed hundreds and hundreds of hours of video, and there was violence. I saw violence there that day with my own eyes. In the dozens of media interviews that he has participated in.
Seen you on TV many times.
Has anybody ever showed a single second of video of his heroic actions that day?
We need heroes like you.
What we learned from the book, though, he goes into great detail about his own history of therapies, counseling sessions.
And I'm now receiving private counseling therapy for the persistent emotional trauma of that day.
Mostly dealing with anger issues. And of course, we did see some of those anger issues displayed.
Now, I want to go on record here. I think it is taking an unfair shot to point out someone's history of mental troubles unless it bears directly on the evidence against them. And that is the case, as you will see. His mental problems bear directly upon his actions and his claimed actions, which do not line up with his actual actions at all on January 6th. And the only reason we know this now is because we're finally getting access to the videotapes 2 years after the incident. They've been withheld from us, they've been withheld from the press, they've been withheld from the courts. So that in the cases against the defendants of the January 6th so-called insurrection, they have not had access to the evidence that corroborates their claims and that exonerates them from the actions that they're accused of having done. So, again, I think it's taking an unfair shot against someone to point out problems that they've had in the past, unless those problems bear directly upon the current issue, which is the case here.
So he was already distressed, already seeing things, imagining things, escalating things in his own mind in a way that other officers weren't. I'm not going to try and play psychologist because I'm not one. There's just something wrong with him. One of those incidences took place at the top of a stairwell down in the crypt. It's a staircase that leads down to the lower terrace where a lot of officers were receiving first aid for their injuries. He was surrounded by some Metropolitan police officers when inexplicably he just lost control.
Vice versa.
There was nobody doing any violence of any type in that room at the time. In fact, there was only a very small handful of protesters in the crypt at that moment, and they were all the way across the room, and he just started screaming and shouting obscenities across the room. And at that moment, Captain Ben Smith of the United States Capitol Police ran over to him, put his hand on his shoulder, calm down, Harry, calm down. A couple of minutes later, Harry broke out in a run towards the staircase that led up to what they call the small rotunda or the speaker's lobby. And as he's running towards those stairs, he accidentally hit the button on his magazine from his M4 automatic weapon. The magazine bounces off the floor. 3 other officers run over. One of them picks it up and hands it to him. Then Harry runs to the top of the stairs. He's clearly agitated. He's in a high level of distress, not because he's been fighting with anyone. When he reached the top of that stairs, that was the moment when Oathkeeper Ken Harrelson saw this highly distressed officer carrying an automatic rifle arrive to the top of the stairs. Already something's going wrong in his head. There wasn't a single officer carried off on the stretcher that day. There was another scene that took place in which he describes in the book, not so terribly accurately. He says that he saw a protester who was leaning against the wall. Another police officer had given this protester a bottle of water to wash out his eyes because the protester had been sprayed with pepper spray. The book says that he was screaming obscenities to that protester and yanks the bottle of water out of his hand and then throws it, in his own words, halfway across the rotunda floor. Harry can be seen entering the rotunda. He's not running, but he does inexplicably walk the full length of the floor. He walks over to this lady sitting on a bench. She's wearing red and complete far end of the Capitol, or the rotunda from where he entered. He's screaming at her, and she's doing nothing. And immediately an officer has to come over and intervene and actually takes the lady away from Officer Dunn. Then Dunn walks over to the middle of the rotunda floor where a protester is sitting in the middle. He's not leaning against the wall. He's sitting on the floor. He has 4 or 5 other police officers around him. He does have a full bottle of water in his hand, and inexplicably, Dunn reaches down and violently snatches the bottle of water out of his hands, but he doesn't throw it across the floor. He just then
ambles across to the other end of the rotunda and walks over and places the bottle on the pedestal of a statue. Then a higher ranking officer can be seen talking to another member of what they call the M4 unit, points at Dunn, and basically you can see from his hand motion says, "Get him out of here." And that officer immediately goes over to Dunn and immediately waves and grabs him and gets him out of there. Once again, he was not in a position where he was de-escalating, where he was calm and collected, where he was in control of his own faculties. Officer Dunn, as a personal training officer who teaches de-escalation tactics and procedures, was not following the lessons that he himself taught those who he was in charge of training. When the January 6th committee was first put together, Nancy Pelosi is famously recorded as saying,
And it's also our duty to establish and preserve the narrative of that day.
the stories.
You know, sometimes politicians speak the truth without realizing it. Nancy Pelosi was speaking the truth there. She said it was our duty to establish the narrative, and that is precisely what she meant. Not to find the truth, as she said earlier, as you saw, but to establish the narrative that would be used to beat down the people on the right and to beat the drum of insurrection and work on getting Trump indicted for the same claims. And now we're finding out, finally, after 2 years, because the videos are being released and we're getting to see them, that nothing like what they claimed happened that day. Officer Dunn has famously said repeatedly that he was called the N-word 50 or 60 times. His words, 50 or 60 times. We found no evidence that anyone ever called him that in any of the videos. And there are video cameras all over the Capitol. They're able to follow officers in every building, in every hallway, in every tunnel. They know exactly where everyone was. And the government has known this all along. But it wasn't to their benefit to release these videos, and so they didn't. Not even in the court where they were required to do so. So they got people convicted by hiding evidence.
Coming out are going to show that there was a concerted effort to manipulate information, manipulate evidence, suppress evidence, and create evidence that does not exist in order to reach those goals of establishing the narrative.
He's been put out as a hero. He received some Citizens Award from Joe Biden. MSNBC has treated him like a god, as opposed to Tarek Johnson, what he actually did on January 6th that was heroic, but he's been villainized.
I reached out to Harry. I've been very fair in my series about the Capitol Police. I believe that they were set up that day. I told Harry right from the get-go that I believe that he was set up as well. My heart goes out to him, and I hope that Harry will eventually see way to maybe talk to me a little bit further and a little deeper and give me a little bit more inside information.
Why? The Republicans have it.
Private First Class Harry Dunn.
The Republicans
The United States.
could release this information anytime they wanted to. But they haven't. You have to ask yourself why. Why will the Republicans not release this information? You think maybe it's because they're also part of that same conspiracy to hide the truth from the American citizens? Something to think about. As always, I pray that you will be abundant, that you will live a long life, that you'll be healthy, and that God will keep you safe, and that He'll do the same for every single person that you love. And I pray that you will be anxious for nothing, but in all things, through prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, you will let your requests be made known to God, and the peace that passes all understanding will keep your heart and mind in Christ Jesus. This is the Vietnam Era Vet out.